The Vanderbilt family tore down their grand estates more swiftly than any storm or conflict could have managed. From 1920 to 1960, this dynasty, which had constructed America's most massive private residences, methodically demolished them to avoid crippling property taxes and upkeep expenses that even their vast wealth couldn't cover. The mansion at 665th Avenue disappeared in 1927, giving way to a department store that better suited the evolving needs of Manhattan. Marble House lingered abandoned for years, its contents dispersed through sales, its grand halls left hushed and chilly. The breakers endured solely because the family relinquished it, transferring title to preserve the structure. Yet amid the Blue Ridge Mountains, a single Vanderbilt descendant charted an alternative course. The residence he created stays under family control to this day, the last remnant of a realm that appeared built to endure eternally. The wealth that fueled such extravagance originated with a humble ferry operator who could scarcely read. Born in 1794 on Staten Island to Dutch farming folk who had tilled their fields for generations, Cornelius Vanderbilt quit school at age 11, not from financial hardship, but because he deemed it useless. At 16, he captained his own vessel, shuttling passengers and freight across New York Harbor for mere cents per voyage. Towering, coarse-mouthed, and fiercely determined, he outmaneuvered rivals by underbidding them until they capitulated or folded. Lacking formal schooling, elite ties, or tolerance for obstacles, young Cornelius grasped a truth that eluded many polished tycoons. Mastery of transport equaled command of the marketplace, dictating the flow of commerce and humanity. He began with one periauger, a shallow-draft sailing craft typical of the waterways. In under 10 years, he commanded a squadron of boats. The 1820s saw him pivot to steam vessels, cutting rates so aggressively that opponents branded him a buccaneer. Labels meant nothing to him. Victory did. By the 1850s, Cornelius shifted from ferries to ocean steamers and then to railroads, the steel behemoths transforming the nation, which he aimed to harness for supremacy. He unified northeastern rail routes with the cutthroat precision once used on harbor routes. When the New York Central Railroad defied his takeover, he blocked his feeder lines from carrying their travelers. Passengers heading to New York ended up marooned in Albany, halting their progress. The company's shares plummeted soon after. Cornelius snapped them up cheaply and integrated the line into his expanding domain. His tactics stayed within the law but spared no mercy. He greased politicians' palms as needed, toyed with stock values freely, demolished lesser foes, and seized their holdings. The press hailed him as an industrial colossus one day, and reviled him as a predatory magnate the next. Cornelius dismissed the chatter. He was forging a legacy beyond fleeting news. Upon his death in January 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt bequeathed roughly $100 million, the greatest personal fortune America had seen. In a time when a craftsman's annual wage hovered around $500, this figure defied imagination. Scaled to modern economic proportions, it surpasses $200 billion. He willed almost everything to his oldest son, William Henry, convinced that splitting it would dilute its strength. His other offspring got modest allowances by comparison. One son, Cornelius Jeremiah, plagued by betting losses and psychological turmoil, inherited just the earnings from a $200,000 trust. He challenged the will in a court battle that gripped New York high society for months but ultimately failed. William Henry Vanderbilt outshone even his father's expectations. If Cornelius had been a creator and warrior, William excelled as a manager and unifier. Devoid of his sire's explosive rage and street fighter savvy, he shone through exceptional organizational talent. He overhauled rail efficiencies, purging built-up inefficiencies from years of hasty growth. He poured funds into upgraded gear, swapping out worn engines for cutting-edge ones. He grew the system judiciously, snapping up only routes that bolstered the core. The outcome stunned observers. 8 years after taking the reins upon his passing in December 1885, William Henry had swelled the family holdings to about $200 million. He stood, by virtually all accounts, as the planet's wealthiest individual. No old-world noble lineage, no storied heritage, no rival magnate could rival the Vanderbilt's two-generation haul. Unlike his father, William Henry had 8 offspring and opted to share the inheritance equally among them. He might have dreaded the disputes that had erupted after the Commodore's lopsided distribution. He might have thought the family's wealth had expanded sufficiently to support such a split. Regardless of his motives, every child inherited anywhere from $10 to $15 million directly, along with further sums secured in trusts. These figures remained enormous even then. A single share would have supported endless idleness, affording ownership of virtually any luxury imaginable. Yet the Vanderbilt offspring craved more than ease. They sought prestige. The challenge lay in gaining entry to elite circles. For all their riches, the Vanderbilts stayed on the fringes of established New York high society. Lineages that traced back for centuries, like the Astors, Livingstons, and Coilers, dismissed fortunes built on railroads as crass and recent. Mrs. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, who styled herself as the gatekeeper of New York's social elite, curated a guest roster limited to precisely 400 individuals. The Vanderbilts found no place there. This snub stung deeply. The younger generation resolved to construct their path to legitimacy. If old guard wouldn't welcome their cash, maybe they would embrace their grand edifices. What followed was a surge in building projects unprecedented in American history, both before and after. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, the Commodore's oldest grandson, led the charge. His residence on West 57th Street occupied a full urban block. When that failed to satisfy his drive, he demolished it and erected a grander version at 1 Fifth Avenue. This newer home boasted 137 rooms, encircling a central atrium. Its foyer drew inspiration from the Château de Luynes in France. The majestic stairway was sculpted from Caen stone, shipped from Normandy at immense cost. Operating the residence demanded 30 household staff, just for essentials. Its yearly upkeep surpassed the lifetime earnings of most Americans. William Kissam Vanderbilt, yet another grandson, countered with his building spree. In Newport, Rhode Island, he created Marble House as a seasonal retreat for his spouse, Alva. Calling it a cottage was pure irony. Finishing the place ran $11 million, with roughly $7 million spent solely on marble. The entryway gleamed with sienna yellow marble walls. The supper room sparkled in bronze and gilt accents. Alva wielded the estate as a tool in her bid to breach New York circles, throwing an extravagant masked gala in 1883 that even Mrs. Astor couldn't overlook. Following their contentious split in divorce, Alva retained ownership. William K. simply commissioned a bigger residence close by. Cornelius II expanded into Newport, too. The Breakers, finished in 1895, stood as an Italian Renaissance villa, crafted by Richard Morris Hunt. Perched on 13 acres facing the Atlantic, it housed 70 rooms and needed 40 full-time servants to function. The banquet hall accommodated 200 diners under a vaulted ceiling, mimicking a vast blue heaven. Across the property, fittings and accents in platinum outshone gold in rarity and price. These estates transcended typical dwellings. They served as bold declarations, tools in the fight for social legitimacy. The Vanderbilts erected them to demonstrate that freshly minted wealth could rival ancient fortunes in scale, opulence, and cultural depth, block by block, chamber by chamber. Masterpiece by masterpiece, one generation vied to eclipse the prior. Siblings strove to top each other. Residences ballooned in size, sourcing rarer materials, amassing finer art yearly. By the 1890s, the Vanderbilts controlled more private living space than any U.S. family ever had. Still, one from that third wave showed scant enthusiasm for the rivalry. George Washington. Vanderbilt II, the last of William Henry's 8 offspring, entered the world in 1862. He observed his siblings' feverish expansions from afar, content in detachment, while Cornelius II and William K. thrived on bold personalities and upward mobility. George remained reserved and scholarly. He mastered 8 tongues with ease. He amassed antique books and original prints. He favored quiet reading rooms over crowded dances, personal reflection over public triumphs. Observers of the era portrayed George as slender, kind-hearted, and awkwardly timid in gatherings. He wed only at 35, an odd delay for someone of his status and means. Railroads, the source of the dynasty's riches, held no appeal for him. He cared even less for the flashy rivalries that gripped his kin. At 21, upon claiming around $10 million directly in steady trust income, he avoided snapping up a lavish Fifth Avenue address. He opted for exploration instead. George devoted years to touring England's and France's storied domains. He analyzed their designs with academic rigor. He scrutinized their landscapes and grounds. He delved into their farming techniques. George pursued a goal his siblings had never chased. He sought meaning that went further than mere ostentation. While his brothers constructed residences aimed at dazzling New York elites and breaking into elite circles previously barred to them, George envisioned something else. He pictured a property that transcended mere magnificence, one that proved truly functional, not just picturesque but capable of being responsibly overseen for future eras. He aspired to blend Yankee drive with old-world refinement, forging a legacy that outlasted the builders themselves. Around the late 1880s, George started scouting locations distant from the cutthroat social scenes of New York and Newport. He discovered his ideal spot amid North Carolina's rugged peaks, in an area so isolated that his relatives couldn't fathom his interest. Yet George discerned potential they overlooked. He recognized the site where he could construct more than a home, a complete realm. George Washington Vanderbilt made his initial trip to Asheville, North Carolina, in 1888. At age 26, he accompanied his mother, Maria Louisa, who hoped the fresh air would ease her ongoing breathing troubles. Western North Carolina's highlands had become known for their restorative qualities. Doctors often prescribed them for those battling tuberculosis or similar pulmonary issues. The Vanderbilts planned for a short wellness retreat. George encountered far more than that. Back then, the Blue Ridge Mountains offered a scene of sharp dichotomies. The summits stood timeless and stunning, shaped by eons of weathering into soft inclines blanketed in dense hardwood woods. The lowlands, however, revealed a harsher tale. Years of harsh cultivation had stripped the earth bare. Logging firms had stripped entire hillsides, resulting in barren inclines and clogged waterways. The area's inhabitants endured severe hardship. Many households eked out a living through barely sufficient farming, cultivating corn and tobacco, mainly for their own needs and occasionally trading extras. The wounds of the Civil War lingered unhealed. Pathways remained rudimentary. Train lines were limited. Asheville was merely a modest settlement of around 10,000 people, primarily catering to affluent Southerners seeking health getaways from the plains below. In this scarred terrain, George spotted opportunities others ignored. Where locals viewed barren plots, he envisioned rejuvenation. Where lumber magnates saw depleted gains, he foresaw replenished woodlands. The widespread destitution made properties incredibly affordable. Long-held family plots sold for mere dollars an acre. George started dreaming up ideas unrelated to Manhattan's high society or Rhode Island's rivalries. His initial buys were restrained. Between 1888 and 1889, he snapped up a few hundred acres via discreet local brokers who hid his name. The vendors remained unaware they were transacting with one of America's wealthiest heirs. They simply knew a buyer was taking over tired fields at rates that felt fair for such marginal dirt. George shelled out $2 to $10 per acre for many of these starters. A few went for even cheaper. The anonymity achieved several aims. It held costs down by stopping sellers from jacking up fees upon discovering the purchaser's status. It also allowed George to refine his ideas undisturbed by kin who might have nudged him elsewhere. His siblings were fixated on their own Newport builds and Manhattan showplaces. They barely noticed George's subtle dealings in the Carolina Highlands. Before the family caught on to his scheme, he had gathered thousands of acres. These formative times sharpened George's concept. He rejected the idea of a seasonal retreat like Marble House or a flashy urban showpiece like 665th Avenue. Instead, he craved a domain rooted in European heritage, a viable farming operation that supported itself while enhancing its grounds. His overseas journeys had exposed him to England's grand rural domains. He had toured French chateaux and German holdings. What captivated him wasn't just the buildings, but their harmony with the environs. These weren't standalone spectacles. They anchored systems of crop cultivation, woodland care, and countryside vitality. The approach that resonated deepest was England's optimal manor framework. The manor house acted as the core of an efficient operation. Orchards yielded provisions. Woodlands supplied lumber and hunting grounds. Hamlets sheltered laborers who upheld the holdings over time. The proprietor served not only as dweller, but as guardian of the territory and its reliant folk. This stood in total opposition to the New York Vanderbilt piles, which functioned solely for show and demanded endless funding from rail profits. George aimed to show that American soil could sustain a fully integrated operation of that nature. Beyond that, he sought to illustrate how even ravaged terrain could be revived. The exhausted farmlands in western North Carolina became his testing ground. He planned to revive the woodlands ravaged by logging firms. He intended to rejuvenate the earth exhausted by negligent farming practices. He would generate jobs for area households long plagued by hardship. Even the mansion, no matter its splendor, would contribute to this broader mission. By 1889, George had gathered sufficient acreage to launch detailed preparations. His property now surpassed 2,000 acres and kept expanding month by month. He reached out to Richard Morris Hunt, America's foremost architect, along with Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect behind Central Park. Both were in their 60s. Each had previously collaborated with the Vanderbilt family. Hunt had crafted Marble House for William K. Vanderbilt and was currently designing the breakers for Cornelius II. Olmsted had advised on landscape efforts for various family estates. George summoned them both to Asheville to witness his vision firsthand. They arrived during the summer of 1889, anticipating maybe another seaside villa in Newport or a rural getaway. Instead, George unveiled a far grander scheme. He led them on horseback tours over his expanding estate. He guided them amid the scarred woodlands. He pointed out the washed-out slopes and the struggling homesteads. Afterward, would one day cover more than 100,000, would one day cover more than 100,000 acres. The building hurdles were intimidating on their own. Roads capable of hauling supplies were non-existent. The regional labor force lacked expertise for intricate construction work. All materials would need shipping in, and skills would have to be taught anew. Olmsted identified other obstacles. The terrain was badly degraded. Repairing it demanded not mere years, but generations of meticulous oversight. The woods required replanting via innovative techniques, scarcely practiced in America then. The ground called for restoration methods, unfamiliar to most U.S. agriculturists. Realizing George's dream meant developing a revolutionary system for land stewardship. Yet both experts noted an exceptional quality in their youthful patron. George shunned quick fixes or concessions. He insisted on perfection, regardless of expense or duration. He chose to invest his wealth in true innovation, not ostentatious rivalry. Hunt and Olmsted committed to the endeavor. It would mark the pinnacle of their professional lives. In the following 2 years, George ramped up his acquisitions. The estate ballooned to 10,000 acres, then 20,000, then 50,000. He acquired whole settlements, integrating towns where inhabitants turned into his workers. He secured logging concessions from firms that had clear-cut the area, with plans to restore the lost timber. By 1891, his domain neared 100,000 acres. It would ultimately span 125,000, rivaling the size of Atlanta itself. Journalists verified the buyer as a Vanderbilt. The tale exploded into headlines. What did this reserved young tycoon intend with acreage exceeding certain European duchies? George provided no official statement. He pressed on, with purchases and preparations. The mountain palace was still distant from groundbreaking, but the territory was locked down, the goal was set. Now he required the talents to bring it to life. Richard Morris Hunt would architect the crowning achievement of his portfolio. Frederick Law Olmsted would shape enduring terrains, and a rising forester named Ford Pinchot would innovate approaches that would reshape U.S. preservation. In unison, they would construct what no other Vanderbilt had conceived. Richard Morris Hunt was 61 when George Vanderbilt enlisted him for a home beyond anything the nation had known. Hunt led American architecture, the inaugural U.S. student at the renowned École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. He had built estates for the Astors, academic libraries, and the base for the Statue of Liberty. Just for the Vanderbilts, he had produced Marble House and was finishing the Breakers. No architect across the nation earned greater admiration or steeper compensation. For the Biltmore endeavor, Hunt contributed more than just expertise in construction. He infused it with a design philosophy drawn from long-standing European customs. In his view, magnificent structures ought to mirror the surrounding environment and heritage. Whenever feasible, they should incorporate regional resources. They needed to pay tribute to time-honored styles, yet adjust them for contemporary demands. The chateau-inspired approach he suggested for Biltmore pulled from the Loire Valley in France, where Renaissance nobility had constructed rural retreats that merged opulence with practicality. Hunt drew particular influence from the Château de Chenonceau, renowned for its iconic spiral staircase and fusion of medieval stronghold with Renaissance elegance. Yet his goal extended beyond simple replication. Instead, he aimed to adapt French ideals to fit American contexts. The outcome would emerge as an innovative creation, a residence that channeled old-world heritage while fulfilling uniquely American functions. Frederick Law Olmsted was 67 years old upon entering the project. His prestige surpassed even that of Hunt. Olmsted had crafted Central Park in Manhattan, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the landscapes around the United States Capitol, and numerous other green spaces that had redefined how Americans perceived communal areas. As a forward thinker, he held that thoughtfully planned terrains could elevate moral and social qualities. Rather than indulgences, parks and gardens represented essential elements of refined society. When Olmsted reached Biltmore, his well-being was already deteriorating. He grappled with persistent sleeplessness and episodes of melancholy that would ultimately lead to his withdrawal from work. Nevertheless, the opportunity posed by George sparked a resurgence in his vitality. This marked his first venture into uncharted territory. Not a civic park or secluded garden, but a comprehensive, overseen terrain spanning tens of thousands of acres. The duo tackled the assignment from contrasting perspectives, which would later converge in a dynamic interplay of ideas. Hunt desired structured gardens encircling the residence, with orderly arrays of blooms and shrubs to accentuate his architectural vision. He pictured terraced levels cascading from the central edifice, Renaissance-inspired Italian gardens featuring fountains and sculptures, and pathways that would unveil the chateau progressively to guests approaching the site. At first, Olmsted pushed back against this concept. Throughout his professional life, he had opposed the contrived nature of rigidly formal European gardens. In his opinion, U.S. settings should celebrate their inherent wildness instead of overlaying foreign designs. The rugged peaks near Asheville possessed a raw beauty. Why distort them with Gallic precision? However, upon deeper examination of the terrain, Olmsted realized that the harmed environment called for active shaping. This wasn't untouched nature deserving protection. It was depleted farmland and ravaged woodlands requiring revival. The core issue shifted from whether to guide the land to the best methods for doing so. Over time, Olmsted fashioned a balanced solution that would characterize Biltmore's estate. Close to the house, he endorsed Hunt's structured gardens. The adjacent zones would include the required terraces and symmetrical foliage arrangements to complement the building's scale. A 4-acre enclosed garden would supply fresh blooms for the interiors and produce for the culinary needs. An Italian garden would deliver a timeless contrast to the French-style chateau. These cultivated zones would act as a bridge, linking the grand structure to the untamed surroundings farther out. Yet outside these orderly sections, Olmsted envisioned a grander scheme. He suggested rehabilitating the scarred woodlands into a supervised forest, showcasing advanced strategies for enduring timber management. The worn slopes would get replanted with tree varieties selected for overall ecosystem vitality. Prioritizing sustainability over rapid logging yields. Watercourses would gain protective margins to curb soil loss. The whole area would function as an experimental site for eco-friendly techniques, scarcely practiced in the U.S. at the time. To bring this blueprint to life, Olmsted enlisted a promising figure named Gifford Pinchot. Only 25 at the time, Pinchot stood among the few Americans versed in sophisticated European silviculture. He had trained in France and Germany, absorbing practices that had preserved continental woodlands for generations, even as U.S. forests faced devastation. Driven, enterprising, and keen to validate that methodical forestry could thrive stateside, Pinchot showed up at Biltmore in 1891 and promptly started inventorying the timber assets. His discoveries validated Olmsted's evaluation. Years of reckless felling had eliminated the prime specimens. What lingered was mostly impaired trees and invasive growth overtaking forsaken cuts. Nutrient depletion from erosion had barrened the inclines. Creeks flowed muddy with silt following each downpour. The methodical extended recovery strategy that Pinchot devised was systematic. He segmented the woodland into operational zones and outlined tailored interventions for each according to its state. Certain sections of the woodland demanded full-scale replanting efforts. In other zones, targeted thinning was essential to eliminate weakened trees and promote the growth of sturdy ones. Introducing fire control, which was unheard of in U.S. forestry during that era, formed a key element of the initiative. Pinchot instructed nearby laborers in these unfamiliar methods. He set up a dedicated seedling nursery to support the regeneration process. The full impact of these efforts would unfold over many years. Pinchot departed after only 3 years to enter public administration, ultimately rising to lead the U.S. Forest Service and implement Biltmore-inspired strategies across the country's vast woodlands. Yet the silviculture initiative he launched endured through his followers. Biltmore would later host America's inaugural Forestry Academy, educating experts who went on to oversee both government and private timberlands nationwide. As Olmsted and Pinchot tackled the grounds, Hunt fine-tuned his building designs. With every update, the mansion expanded in size. Observing the terrain, evolve fueled George's grander aspirations. What started as an expansive rural retreat evolved into a near-royal domain. The ultimate blueprint specified around 175,000 square feet of living area. The edifice included 250 chambers. It stood as the grandest personal home in America. Hunt's chosen aesthetic merged French Gothic with Renaissance influences. The rooftop showcased sharp angles and ornate stacks evoking 16th-century French estates. The front elevation offered balanced formality, accented by spires and battlements. Still, Hunt wove in forward-thinking features absent from strict period replicas. The layout optimized daily household functions for smooth operations. Utility zones linked seamlessly to the areas they served. Contemporary engineering solutions were embedded from the outset, avoiding clumsy retrofits. Hunt recognized that this residence had to serve beyond mere spectacle. George planned to reside there permanently, oversee his property from it, and host visitors for prolonged stays. Thus, the design demanded sensible arrangements that ornate facades often overlooked. Culinary spaces had to flow directly into formal eating areas. Staff pathways ensured discreet movement away from company eyes. Ample warehousing was vital for stocking a remote, independent property, distant from city vendors. The partnership between Hunt and Olmsted occasionally hit rough patches. Each was used to dominating their creative domain. As they grew older, thoughts of their enduring impact weighed heavier. Conflicts arose over access paths, outbuilding locations, and the optimal reveal of the manor to arrivals. George stepped in as a steady arbitrator, astonishing the pair with his composure. He weighed their viewpoints thoughtfully. He negotiated balances that safeguarded each designer's core priorities. By 1892, the blueprints were largely finalized. Hunt had drafted a structure whose expense would eclipse any prior private American dwelling. Olmsted had crafted a setting that required decades to fully develop. Pinchot had initiated silviculture projects poised to revive over 100,000 acres. The blueprint stood ready. The real test lay in turning it into reality. Hunt never witnessed his magnum opus finished. His condition worsened amid the building phase. He passed away in July 1895, mere months shy of the home's debut to occupants. Olmsted persisted longer, yet succumbed to psychological decline, compelling his withdrawal. His remaining days unfolded in institutional care, blind to the vistas he had shaped. Both invested their waning ingenuity into Biltmore. It marked for each the pinnacle of extraordinary U.S. legacies. Building kicked off in full force in 1889, reshaping Asheville's surrounding peaks into the biggest non-public work site ever in the States. During the height of operations, about 1,000 crew members toiled across the grounds. They hailed from local districts, far-off urban centers, and even overseas. For many, it was their initial encounter with such an immense endeavor. Most devoted years to manifesting George Vanderbilt's dream. The initial hurdle was mere access to the location. No suitable routes existed for hauling the enormous volume of supplies demanded. George arranged a 3-mile dedicated rail branch linking the property to the primary Southern rail network. This enabled shipments of stone, timber, and machinery to reach the build area unhindered. Laborers installed rails across challenging ground that had thwarted past ventures. The line itself ran into hundreds of thousands in costs. The limestone cladding the outer walls originated from an Indiana quarry. George picked it for its resilience and soft yellowish hue, which harmonized with the hilly backdrop. Workers at the quarry sliced out enormous stone slabs, each tipping the scales at multiple tons. Freight trains then transported these loads over halfway across the nation to reach Asheville. On location, skilled masons hand-carved every piece, assembling them with such exactness that the barriers could endure for hundreds of years. To support the labor force, George constructed a complete community for their needs. Biltmore Village emerged on nearby terrain beside the build site, complete with family homes, places of worship, educational facilities, retail outlets, and medical care centers. Its cohesive design blended seamlessly with the main property's aesthetic. George's plan was for it to persist beyond the building phase, offering lasting residences to the caretakers of the finished estate. Far from simple benevolence, this move stemmed from his insight that content-stable living quarters would boost efficiency and dedication among staff. He recognized, too, that the property would demand ongoing personnel for years ahead. By establishing the village, he guaranteed that talented tradespeople had incentives to remain locally instead of departing after the primary work wrapped up. Numerous households that took root in Biltmore Village amid the building period stayed on for succeeding generations. The mansion took shape gradually during the initial 1890s. Ground preparation kicked off in 1889 and stretched over a full year plus. Layer by layer, the enclosures climbed amid the scenic peaks. Laborers fitted steel girders to uphold the hefty rock facade. They cast cement bases capable of holding substantial decor and sizable assemblies. The project's intricate demands pushed the boundaries of late 1800s oversight techniques. Architect Hunt incorporated state-of-the-art innovations for the period. Power would illuminate the entire residence via an on-site generator, a standout feature when countless U.S. dwellings depended on gas fixtures or oil lamps. Beyond illumination, the wiring drove a built-in suction setup, automated service elevators, and pioneering climate regulation for home heating. Water systems ran through all levels. In total, the building would boast 43 restrooms, a lavish extravagance beyond comprehension. As opulent residences often stuck to privies and bedside vessels, fresh and heated water flowed to each story. Downstairs, a heated basin provided swimming access in any season. This aquatic feature stood out as an engineering feat. Housed inside during an age when such amenities graced only elite athletic venues. Its warmth came from a core, furnace-piping vapor to room-based heaters. While common in grand structures, the precision of its regulators broke new ground. Room-specific dials let residents fine-tune their comfort. It delivered steady coziness through harsh highland chills without the excess heat common in simpler setups. Preventing blazes was a priority. Builders opted for non-combustible components as much as feasible. Cement bases and rock barriers resisted flames. Steel supports supplanted timber frameworks, which had fueled catastrophic losses in comparable estates. An interconnected alert network linked to a command post enabled swift action against any blaze. Such measures drew from tragedies that had razed other lavish homes of the time. Within, artisans fashioned interiors of lavish splendor. The foyer showcased a curving limestone flight ascending under an artistically adorned vault. The dining chamber accommodated 64 diners around one long board, surrounded by draped banners and antique arms. The study housed roughly 23,000 books amassed by George during 20 years of global pursuits and acquisitions. This space warrants special note, as it unveils key traits of its owner. George Vanderbilt ranked as one of the era's foremost bibliophiles. Fluent in 8 tongues, he gathered works in each. Racks displayed inaugural printings, scarce documents, and full author compilations. A lofty double-height roof permitted an upper walkway with extra storage. A grand hearth offered fireside solace for chilly day perusals. No mere showpiece crafted by decorators, it served as the active study of a true intellectual. Additional chambers mirrored varied facets of George's passions and character. The music area included a pipe organ to resonate through the chamber. The morning meal space allowed private meals with kin and intimates. Quarters for unmarried male visitors ensured ease in their section. Women's guest zones upheld the era's rigid divides. The lower floor held utilities, rendering the residents mostly independent. The expansive kitchen was equipped to handle feasts for hundreds, boasting cutting-edge appliances of the day. Ample pantries held enough supplies to keep the estate running for weeks without outside help. On-site laundry operations ensured that fabrics and garments stayed clean entirely within the property bounds. Staff accommodations offered the era's respectable comforts for the live-in workforce. The impressive array of artwork that George curated for the residents spanned eras of European and American artistic achievement. Among his acquisitions were pieces by Renoir, Sargent, and Whistler, along with tapestries crafted in medieval ateliers and furnishings once owned by continental nobility. Rather than serving as mere investments or showpieces, these treasures were meant for everyday immersion. George sought to surround himself with beauty in his routine, weaving it into the fabric of home life instead of confining it to sterile exhibit spaces. By 1895, the primary building phase had wrapped up. The total expenditure reached about $6 million, which translates to more than $100 million in contemporary terms. While landscaping efforts persisted around the property, the main edifice was fully prepared for inhabitants. George organized an elaborate debut for Christmas Eve, summoning relatives and close companions to behold the realization of his dream. That winter, visitors stepping through the grand entrance in December encountered a mansion without parallel on American soil. They stepped into a vast foyer capped by an ornate painted vault above. Meals unfolded in a majestic dining chamber, warmed by 3 massive hearths. Leisure time unfolded amid bookshelves stocked to challenge those of top institutions. They strolled through budding gardens that hinted at the genius of Olmsted's vision, even as they continued to evolve. George Vanderbilt, the reserved scion who had shunned his siblings' flashy rivalries, had erected a marvel that eclipsed their efforts. This wasn't just about scale, though it was undeniably the grandest, or expense, which had been staggering. Instead, he fashioned a cohesive domain illustrating sustainable land stewardship, woodland revival, and a palatial home that nurtured rather than depleted its surroundings. For a short span, George savored the fruits of his labor. In 1898, he wed Edith Stuyvesant Dresser. The pair journeyed afar, hosted gatherings, and started a family. Their child, Cornelia, arrived in 1900 as the successor to all her father had wrought. Prospects appeared solid, yet the dawning 20th century loomed with unforeseen trials for George and Edith alike. George first encountered Edith Stuyvesant Dresser in Paris one summer in 1897. At 34, she brought a solid education and roots in a prominent U.S. lineage descending from Peter Stuyvesant, the final Dutch leader of New Amsterdam, departing from the typical socialite mold. Edith had thrived on her own for years, earning her keep as a travel aide to affluent clients and handling her personal finances capably. Her demeanor blended pragmatism, sharp intellect, and refreshing simplicity. George, 35 and single, had devoted much of his maturity to crafting the domain now needing a guiding hand. Reports from the time indicate an instant shared spark. He valued her steady reliability and true curiosity about intellectual matters. She saw in him a matching soul who prized depth above ostentation. Their union took place in Paris on June 1, 1898, with dignitaries from American diplomacy and old-world nobility in attendance. The newlyweds embarked on an extended honeymoon, nearly a full year, roaming Europe to study the manners and landscapes that shaped Biltmore's blueprint. They gathered artworks and decor to outfit the remaining chambers. Visions formed of the shared existence awaiting them amid North Carolina's peaks. Upon their return to Biltmore that fall of 1899, Edith took charge of domestic operations with a prowess that earned widespread admiration. Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt entered the world on August 22, 1900, the lone offspring of George and Edith, destined to inherit her father's legacy. Her arrival sparked joy across the locale. Laborers who constructed Biltmore, growers who provisioned it, and locals who relied on it all grasped that this little one promised enduring legacy. The property now boasted an heir for tomorrow. Over the ensuing 10 years, rhythms at Biltmore fell into a satisfying groove. George deepened his intellectual endeavors, expanding the library and exchanging letters with global experts and enthusiasts. Edith oversaw home affairs and entertaining welcoming visitors from Manhattan, the capital, and abroad. Cornelia's upbringing unfolded in a singular American tableau. 250 chambers for discovery, vast expanses for roaming, and devoted parents who delighted in her presence. Yet from the outset, the estate's financial underpinnings raised concerns. The construction of the house alone had run George about $6 million. Acquiring the surrounding land had added millions more to the tab. Running the place day to day demanded a workforce of hundreds: household staff, farm hands, foresters, and repair teams. While the property earned a bit from milk production and logging, it fell far short of covering expenses. George had come into roughly $10 million from his father's estate, and trust funds brought in extra cash, yet even vast Vanderbilt fortunes had their boundaries. By the turn of the century, the holdings were depleting funds quicker than they could recover. George started seeking methods to lighten the load while holding on to his original dream. His approach proved as deliberate as ever. Instead of offloading parcels to developers who could ravage them, he proposed handing over a huge swath of his property to the U.S. government. In 1914, he set up the gift of around 87,000 acres, laying the groundwork for what turned into Pisgah National Forest. This area had been central to Ford Pinchot's forestry initiatives and Carl Shank's forestry school. It embodied the eco-friendly woodland practices George had promoted right from the start. The gift achieved multiple aims at once. It lifted the weight of overseeing nearly 90,000 acres off the estate's books. It safeguarded the terrain from misuse forever, and it showed how individual preservation initiatives could serve the greater good. The leftover, roughly 30,000 acres, formed a still vast domain, but far easier for a family with finite means to handle. George never witnessed the transfer's full execution. On March 6, 1914, he had an urgent appendectomy at a Washington, D.C. hospital. The procedure succeeded at first, yet problems arose soon after. An infection took hold, worsening in spite of his doctor's dedicated care. On March 6, 1914, George Washington Vanderbilt II passed away due to surgical complications. He was just 51. Word arrived at Biltmore almost immediately. Edith, who had stayed back in North Carolina, anticipating his quick return, learned instead that she was widowed, left with a 13-year-old daughter and America's grandest private residence. Longtime employees who had worked under George assembled in the main hall, with many in tears. The visionary behind their livelihood had departed. George's service occurred in Washington, with interment afterward in the family cemetery on Staten Island, alongside his grandfather, the Commodore. Edith traveled with the remains northward before heading back to Biltmore to tackle the daunting task of overseeing her late husband's legacy. At 50, she possessed considerable wealth by ordinary measures, though not by Vanderbilt ones, and now oversaw a property that perpetually spent more than it yielded. The will bequeathed all to Edith and Cornelia, but the legacy came with hurdles. The estate had already swallowed much of George's capital. What liquid funds remained paled against the relentless upkeep expenses. Edith confronted a pivotal decision that would decide Biltmore's fate, whether it endured or fell victim to the wave of grand estates crumbling and razed nationwide. She might liquidate it. Developers were eager for the site, The acreage could fetch millions subdivided into lots. The mansion could attract a purchaser, maybe a hotel chain or public entity. Plenty of women in her circumstances would have cashed out and sought simpler surroundings. Edith opted otherwise. She resolved to retain the property. She would devise strategies for its viability. She would safeguard the creation that George had made for their shared daughter. This path called for swift cutbacks. The workforce shrank. Initiatives got scaled down. The forestry school shut down. Dairy activities shifted toward practicality over innovation. Yet Edith knew frugality alone wouldn't suffice. The grounds required revenue streams surpassing farming and woodcutting. She started considering a concept no Vanderbilt had truly entertained before. She would welcome fee-paying guests into the home. She would allow outsiders into the secluded realm George had fashioned. She would transform Biltmore into a commercial venture. Such an idea felt revolutionary back in 1914. Opulent residences were inherently exclusive. Admitting tourists smacked of defeat, signaling the family could no longer sustain seclusion. Affluent clans under comparable strains often raised their burdensome palaces rather than subjecting them to scrutiny. The ruins of Vanderbilt chateaus in New York and Newport bore witness to this inclination toward obliteration instead of openness. Edith put off the choice for over 10 years. She trusted that Cornelia's future union could deliver the funds to avert the need for public entry. Edith observed the steady downfall of fellow Vanderbilt estates under the demolishing forces. She managed to sustain Biltmore amid the harsh times of World War I and the volatile decade of the 1920s. Yet the financial pressures proved unavoidable. Lacking fresh revenue, the property would inevitably drain the last of the family's assets. Come 1930, Edith decided to pursue an innovative approach. She planned to unlock the entrances George Vanderbilt had crafted for his loved ones and welcome outsiders inside. This bold venture could either rescue Biltmore or demonstrate that grand estates like it held no place in contemporary America. As Edith Vanderbilt fought to safeguard Biltmore, her late husband's kin rapidly raised their own lavish homes. The opulent structures that once graced Fifth Avenue, icons of Gilded Age extravagance, succumbed sequentially to destruction. Examining the fate of these alternative Vanderbilt holdings underscores the extraordinary nature of Biltmore's endurance. Demolition commenced in 1914, coinciding with George's passing. The initial Vanderbilt residence, William Henry Vanderbilt's at 645th Avenue, was dismantled to pave the way for business ventures. This dwelling had been George's childhood home, erected by his father to herald the clan's entry into New York's upper echelons. It endured for scarcely 3 decades. The underlying plot had grown so valuable that no occupants could rationally defend its residential purpose. The rate of teardown quickened during the 1920s. Had demanded $3 million in construction costs back in 1882, and spearheaded Alva Vanderbilt's push into Manhattan's social circles. Today, it reduced to debris, clearing space for a commercial tower. The process spanned several weeks, drawing daily spectators who witnessed yet another emblem of the Gilded Age vanish. By 1927, the most expansive Vanderbilt manor in Manhattan shared this destiny. Cornelius Vanderbilt, II's abode on Fern's West 57th Street, ranked as the city's most magnificent personal dwelling. It boasted more than 100 chambers, with a lobby reaching 3 levels upward. Its artworks could compete with modest galleries. Construction and decoration had run about $5 million. Sold for under $2 million, it appealed to purchasers solely for its site. Demolition teams started work that spring. Wrought iron elements headed to junk yards, Ornate fireplace surrounds found buyers among enthusiasts. Wrought iron elements headed to junk traders. Subsequently, the structure crumbled layer by layer, section by section. By fall, only an empty parcel lingered, primed for a towering office edifice, the full teardown wrapped up in under 6 months. What fueled such obliteration? Urban property dynamics had turned sharply unfavorable for habitation. Manhattan's terrain prices had soared to levels where even affluent clans couldn't defend monopolizing whole city blocks for one residence. Levies on holdings devoured vast sums. Upkeep expenses persisted endlessly. Staffing needs loomed vast. A property like the one at 6th and 65th Avenue demanded scores of household workers to function. Securing and retaining skilled help grew ever tougher with emerging job prospects elsewhere. The 1913 introduction of federal income levies reshaped the equation for immense riches. Prior to this, wealth could multiply with few bounds. Post-implementation, top-tier households saw their holdings dwindle. The highest levy rate surged from 7% in 1913 to 77% in 1918. Upholding a 100-room palace along Fifth Avenue shifted from mere excess to fiscal absurdity. Inheritance duties worsened the strain. Upon a Vanderbilt's demise, authorities seized a hefty share of the legacy prior to distribution to successors. With every succession, the clan's treasury contracted more. Residences erected by elders frequently became unaffordable for their descendants. Societal shifts weighed as heavily as monetary ones. The era that spawned these estates had evaporated. Post-World War I, the lavish soirees that warranted vast dance halls and feast areas waned. Successive generations favored condos and transient stays over the rigors of estate oversight. Domestic help, formerly abundant and inexpensive, now pursued superior roles in manufacturing and clerical work. The foundational systems upholding Gilded Age lifestyles were crumbling away. The Newport summer homes outlasted their Manhattan counterparts to a degree, though, marginally. Marble House, the lavish retreat William Kissam constructed for Alva, languished vacant for years following her passing. Its contents went under the auction block. Repairs were postponed. Into the 1930s, it lingered as a hollow remnant of its past splendor, upheld less by design than by oversight. Eventually, Marble House was gifted to the Preservation Society of Newport County to avoid total destruction. Yet this act of giving it up marked a kind of capitulation. The Breakers, Cornelius II's lavish 70-room Italian Renaissance palace, traced a parallel path. The expenses required to upkeep a place like that surpassed any practical gains. Relatives weighed options like tearing it down, offloading it, or merely abandoning it altogether. By 1948, the Preservation Society took over on a lease from Countess Cheney, the final family resident. Tourists gained entry to the estate, while the Countess held onto a modest suite on the top level. She remained there until her passing in 1965, becoming the last Vanderbilt to dwell in the residence her father had constructed. This trend echoed nationwide. The opulent estates of the Gilded Age were crumbling on all sides. New York's Frick Mansion evolved into a museum. Flagler's holdings in Florida shifted to hotels and public offices. Morgan's assets went to various organizations. The era of grand private chateaus was fading away. The 20th century offered no room for sprawling 100-room dwellings staffed by hordes of servants, all for one family's enjoyment. In this context, Biltmore's endurance appears nearly wondrous. It dwarfed the raised Manhattan estates in size. More isolated, tougher to access, and less appealing to would-be institutional purchasers, it faced sky-high running costs. Every factor that sank the other Vanderbilt holdings struck the Asheville property with full intensity. Still, Biltmore possessed edges that city palaces did not. The surrounding acreage held worth past simple property flips. Its farms and woodlands generated revenue. even if slim. The location drew crowds in a manner Fifth Avenue never could. And Edith Vanderbilt displayed a resolve her husband's kin evidently missed. She refused to dismantle George's creation. She wouldn't yield to the financial pressures that toppled the rest of the family's abodes. From North Carolina, Edith observed the teardowns. She pored over news reports of demolition crews smashing into marble corridors. She realized those same pressures would inevitably target Biltmore without a fresh strategy. While other Vanderbilts opted for ruin over reinvention, Edith forged a different route. Her approach would redefine not only Biltmore, but also the role of a magnificent estate in egalitarian America. Others viewed such relics as burdensome behemoths ripe for the wrecking crew. Edith spotted potential. As they discarded history, she welcomed the masses to partake in it. On March 15, 1930, Biltmore House's main entrance welcomed ticketed guests for the inaugural time. The moment was disastrously ideal. Only 5 months prior, the stock market had plummeted. The Great Depression was spiraling into prolonged financial ruin. Households nationwide forfeited their nest eggs, livelihoods, and dwellings. Hundreds of banks collapsed. Soup lines wound through urban streets. This was when Edith Vanderbilt elected to usher outsiders into America's grandest private home. The choice had simmered for years. Since George's passing in 1914, Edith had pondered public entry. She postponed it often, banking on alternative fixes. She noted how George's kin raised their Manhattan piles instead of sharing them. She witnessed the breakers and Marble House languish, decaying in Newport. She grasped that unlocking Biltmore shattered Vanderbilt traditions. Yet she also knew the flip side meant forfeiting the estate completely. Her daughter Cornelia wed John Francis Amherst Cecil in 1924 during an extravagant rite in the Biltmore Gardens. The union looked hopeful at first. John Cecil hailed from an ancient English line tied to the Cecil lineage, which had advised English kings for generations. His grandfather was the 3rd Marquess of Exeter. Noble in heritage, though. The Cecils lacked Vanderbilt-level riches. The wedding granted Cornelia partnership and status, but no bailout for Biltmore's woes. John Cecil emerged as a solid steward with real affection for the grounds. Still, he couldn't produce funds the family lacked. Edith wed again in 1925, this time to Rhode Island Senator Peter Golet Gerry, from another long-standing American wealth, albeit far slimmer than the Vanderbilt's peak. The union pulled Edith from Biltmore for long stretches. She split her days between Rhode Island and North Carolina. Southern winters, northeastern summers. This setup handed routine oversight more to Cornelia and John Cecil, though Edith held sway over key calls. Edith was the one who decided when the estate would open its doors to the public. In 1930, she unveiled the plan with great care, portraying it not as a desperate financial move, but as a generous act of support amid the country's dire straits. For years, Asheville's prominent business figures had pushed for tourism initiatives. The local economy had long thrived on affluent travelers, drawn to the restorative air of the mountains. But the Great Depression now jeopardized that foundation completely. Lodgings sat vacant. Eateries shuttered their doors, and those reliant on visitor spending faced joblessness. By presenting the opening this way, Edith highlighted it as a vital aid to the area. The people of western North Carolina were enduring severe hardships. Allowing access to Biltmore would generate employment opportunities for locals. It would lure sightseers whose spending could revive hotels and dining spots in Asheville. Above all, it would offer a compelling draw to encourage travel, even in tough economic conditions. While this rationale held true to a degree, it also cleverly shifted focus away from the Vanderbilt family's personal monetary struggles. True to their heritage of pride, the Vanderbilts extended aid to those around them. rather than revealing their own vulnerabilities. The initial entrants handed over $2 apiece for entry, a hefty amount in the midst of the downturn, roughly akin to $30 or $40 in contemporary terms. At the crisis's peak, countless U.S. households scraped by on under $2 daily. Still, crowds arrived. Folks drove in from surrounding towns in their cars. Others journeyed by rail from far-off regions. Curiosity drove them, a desire to witness the lifestyles of the elite, both past and present, especially as everyday people saw their possessions vanish for that modest fee. Guests enjoyed a structured walkthrough of the estate's primary levels. Knowledgeable escorts guided intimate parties along a deliberate path. The experience kicked off in the grand entryway, featuring a towering limestone stairway, twisting skyward under a vividly decorated ceiling. Guests proceeded to the dining hall, where 3 grand hearths flanked a table set for up to 64 diners. They marveled at the 2-story library, its 23,000 books reaching toward an elaborately crafted ceiling. Brief views into sleeping quarters and lounges revealed furnishings boasting paintings and heirlooms familiar only from print media to most folks. As the group moved along, the escorts wove in tales. They shared details about George Vanderbilt's identity and motivations for creating such a grand residence. They recounted the building's assembly, the vast workforce involved, and the prolonged dedication required. They highlighted intricate features that might escape notice. Through these narratives, the estate came alive, not as a sterile exhibit space, but as a dwelling, immense and beyond ordinary grasp, yet welcoming. This intimate approach set Biltmore apart from more formal historic residences. People sensed themselves as invited visitors, beyond just paying customers. The turnout surpassed every projection. In the face of financial woes, or maybe fueled by them, ordinary citizens yearned for diversion. They sought a brief respite from daily woes. They dreamed of existences far removed from their realities. They embraced tales of opulence and magnificence that stood in sharp relief to their own deprivations. Biltmore delivered exactly that, and beyond. In its debut year, thousands flocked there. Buzz quickly amplified the numbers into tens of thousands. Ticket sales started small but climbed reliably across the 1930s. Of greater significance, the earnings laid the groundwork for a lasting strategy that would steer the property onward. The residence could now help fund its upkeep. Dependence on shrinking familial funds became unnecessary. A fresh approach took shape, blending personal stewardship with communal involvement. Resided at Biltmore alongside their sons. George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil and William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil, who arrived in 1925 and 1928. The children matured within the walls erected by their great-grandfather, representing the 5th lineage to inhabit Biltmore. Yet their upbringing contrasted sharply with that of prior kin. Daily, they coexisted with outsiders in the space. They observed sightseers traversing the very areas where they took meals and entertained themselves. From a young age, they grasped that Biltmore was theirs, but also in a real way, accessible to any who bought a ticket. This distinctive early life left a deep mark on the siblings. They internalized early on that Biltmore's endurance hinged on connecting with the wider world. They came to see that such estates could no longer thrive as secluded family retreats in today's society. In time, they would assume leadership and evolve the site into a vision unimaginable to their forebears. That change, however, remained far off. During the 1930s and 1940s, the priority stayed squarely on endurance. The Great Depression posed real hardships, yet the estate weathered them without catastrophe. While many neighboring sites shuttered their doors, Biltmore stayed accessible to the public. Attendance ebbed and flowed alongside the economy, but held steady overall. World War II introduced fresh obstacles. Fuel shortages curtailed road trips by car. Countless potential guests, young men in particular, were deployed abroad in combat. Yet the conflict also yielded surprising advantages. In 1942, officials from the National Gallery of Art reached out to the Vanderbilts with an odd proposition, seeking a bomb-proof haven for their prized artworks amid fears of aerial attacks during the conflict's initial phase. They eyed Biltmore's isolated setting and robust, flame-resistant design as perfect storage. For a stretch of years, iconic works from artists like Rembrandt, Vermeer, and fellow Renaissance masters found temporary shelter in the music room and nearby chambers. Once peace returned and the collection shipped back to the capital, Biltmore could boast of aiding the country in its time of crisis. The years after the war ushered in steady recovery. Car ownership surged across the U.S. With disposable income rising, folks increasingly invested in vacations and recreation. The new network of interstates opened up far-flung spots like never before. Biltmore rode this wave of prosperity. In 1958, reaching 85 years old. She had in 1958 reaching 85 years old. She had survived George by 44 years. It was she who steered the property through its riskiest periods. Her bold choice to welcome visitors averted the downfall that struck all other prominent Vanderbilt holdings. As mansions on Fifth Avenue and in Newport crumbled, hers endured. Absent her resolve to share the estate and her pragmatic resolve, Biltmore would likely have faced teardown or handover well before her passing. Cornelia's journey proved far more turbulent. Her union with John Cecil dissolved in divorce in 1934, a shocking affair for the times. She departed Biltmore and later made her home in England, where she resided unobtrusively until dying in 1976. She chose never to reside again in the birthplace of her youth, viewing it merely as a sporadic stopover. Control of the property effectively shifted to her sons, George and William Cecil, who would shepherd it across the latter half of the 1900s. The Cecil siblings each contributed distinct talents to their legacy. The elder George possessed a keen eye for aesthetics and firm views on safeguarding heritage. William, a Harvard Business School alumnus, grasped contemporary business strategies. Though they occasionally clashed over strategy and focus, both upheld a core dedication to retaining family ownership while ensuring financial viability. This dedication shaped every key choice for the ensuing 6 decades. Nowadays, over 1.4 million people stream through Biltmore's entrance annually. They travel the entryway crafted by Frederick Law Olmsted, spotting the chateau's silhouette, peeking through strategic breaks in the foliage. Vast parking areas handle thousands of vehicles, from which guests proceed on foot to the residence George Vanderbilt erected almost 130 years prior. Its limestone facade continues to shimmer in warm golden hues under the sun. The pitched rooftops remain studded with stacks and gables. The foyer beyond the front door still stuns newcomers, mirroring the awe of those initial arrivals on Christmas Eve, 1895. Since Edith's pivotal move to admit the public in 1930, the grounds have undergone profound changes. Simple guided walks have blossomed into a full-scale hospitality venture. The Biltmore Winery, launched in 1985 amid repurposed barns from the old dairy, now churns out hundreds of thousands of cases yearly. It ranks among the nation's top winery attractions. The Inn on Biltmore Estate debuted in 2001, delivering upscale lodging right on the premises. Another lodging option, the Village Hotel on Biltmore Estate, arrived in 2015. Eateries, boutiques, and nature pursuits have since added diverse income sources that would have astounded George Vanderbilt. Such expansions have sparked backlash from heritage guardians over time. Critics contend that the additions of inns and the winery have eroded the site's authentic vibe. They lament the sprawl of lots and retail outlets overtaking former pastures and woods. Fears linger that chasing profits has overshadowed the preservation ethos that first warranted visitor entry. These worries carry weight. Any business operation courts the danger of prioritizing dollars over historical fidelity. Still, the Cecil kin and their consultants have offered a steadfast rebuttal to detractors. Untouched conservation wasn't the other path. Instead, it mirrored the endgame for every other significant Vanderbilt asset. The real options were razing, gifting away, or letting it decay. The presence of hotels and wineries on the property stems from their role in producing the revenue needed to sustain the mansion. Absent that financial support, Biltmore would have vanished long ago. The figures back up this perspective. During high season, Biltmore hires around 2,400 staff members. The sprawling estate pumps more than $2 billion each year into the local economy. Recent analyses show that the house benefits from ongoing upkeep, unmatched by most museum sites. Year after year, conservators tend to the furniture, fabrics, and artwork. Engineers keep a watchful eye on the structure, without pause. Modernizations to the wiring, pipes, and climate controls have occurred multiple times, all while respecting the architectural heritage they support. Such intensive stewardship demands funding far beyond what ticket sales could supply. The varied income sources, hotels, the winery, dining spots, and shops, enable the restoration efforts that uphold the building's integrity. Those pushing for an uncompromised preservation strategy seldom address the funding challenge. The Vanderbilt fortune that erected Biltmore faded away many years back. Today, only the estate's self-generated earnings keep it afloat. The ownership model, facilitating this, is extraordinary in its own right. Biltmore stays under private control by George and Edith Vanderbilt's heirs. It functions as a profit-driven company rather than a charitable institution or government entity. This approach has outlasted the paths chosen by other grand estates. Nonprofit historic homes grapple endlessly with solicitations and neglected repairs. Sites under public ownership contend with fiscal limits and bureaucratic meddling. By running as a commercial operation, Biltmore can channel resources into its longevity, free from reliance on benefactors or public funds. William Cecil, who oversaw the property from 1960 until his passing in 2017, merits the main acknowledgement for shaping this framework. He recognized that safeguarding the estate and pursuing profitability could complement each other. He poured substantial resources into guest facilities, knowing enhanced experiences would draw larger crowds, boost spending, and thereby finance deeper conservation. The self-reinforcing loop he established has kept Biltmore thriving for over 50 years. Now his sons steer the organization. William A.V. Cecil Jr. acts as CEO, upholding the lineage of kin-led oversight that dates to John Cecil in the 1930s. Vanderbilt offspring in the sixth generation continue to play key roles in the venture their forebear launched. No other major U.S. residence boasts this degree of unbroken family stewardship and oversight. What significance does Biltmore hold in the present day? It varies by perspective. To the over 1 million tourists who visit yearly, it provides a window into a bygone era of opulence and status. They stroll through chambers where Gilded Age magnates once hosted lavish meals and balls. They admire heirloom art and decor, embodying refined legacies. They envision existences worlds apart from their everyday realities. For locals in western North Carolina, Biltmore forms a vital economic pillar. As a top regional employer, it bolsters innumerable lodging, eateries, and businesses across Asheville and surrounding areas. The area's reputation for creativity, heritage, and upscale lifestyles draws heavily from Biltmore's stabilizing influence. For experts in conservation and heritage travel, Biltmore serves as a compelling case study. It proves that personal stewardship of palatial homes can succeed with the proper elements in place. Blending ample size and income diversity with expert leadership and familial dedication has yielded outcomes that rival other approaches. Not all heritage assets can mirror Biltmore's success. Yet those positioned to do so ought to examine its strategies closely. Within the Vanderbilt heritage, Biltmore stands as the lone enduring emblem of a dynasty that once commanded America's riches. The Fifth Avenue palaces have disappeared. Newport's summer homes have shifted to trust organizations. The rail networks that forged the wealth now fold into vast conglomerates. Solely, Biltmore persists under family possession, still producing revenue, still open to guests, still rising as George Vanderbilt envisioned. Contrasts with fellow Vanderbilt holdings highlight Biltmore's exceptional endurance. The Breakers, for all its splendor, falls under the Preservation Society of Newport County, relinquished by the family years past. Marble House took a similar route. The New York City townhouses evaporated entirely, supplanted by skyscrapers and condos that erase traces of their former glory. Cornelius Vanderbilt, II's expansive home at 5 West 57th Street, once the city's grandest private dwelling, left no marker whatsoever. Biltmore persists because one determined woman wouldn't allow its demise. Edith Vanderbilt had the option in 1914 to sell or donate the estate and enjoy a life of ease from the funds. Instead, she opted to safeguard it for her daughter and future descendants. When keeping it intact demanded opening it to the public, she embraced the trade-off that other Vanderbilts turned down. And when that public access called for commercial elements, her successors went along with it as well. Generation after generation prioritized endurance over perfection, flexibility over stubbornness. Entrance encounter. The identical limestone entrance encounter the identical limestone stairs he had installed. They passed through chambers adorned with the very artwork and textiles he gathered. They gaze from panes onto landscapes shaped by Olmsted and woodlands that Pinchot started rehabilitating over 100 years back. Such persistence is extraordinary. Its longevity defies the odds. The significance invites reflection. Amid an era where durability feels rare, Biltmore has proven enduring. In a society that prizes upheaval and reinvention, it has held on to its core identity for 130 years. Within an economic system fixated on short-term gains, one family has stewarded a legacy through 6 generations. The mansion derided by detractors as a costly burden, a whimsical project of an introverted young heir with vast wealth, has surpassed every comparable edifice his kin erected. The entrance gates swing wide every dawn. Throngs of tourists arrive daily. The grounds continue to flourish year-round. The woods George Vanderbilt protected from overuse still cloak the hills encircling his masterpiece. Biltmore thrives not by encasing itself in stasis, but by evolving while staying true to its essence. That's the key to its lasting power. That's the insight it imparts to those aiming to create something timeless.